that indeed has been hidden. Parts of it have been changed, usually for the reasons of men, and we're all looking for truth. And indeed, after we look at all the evidence that's going to be presented this morning, if indeed Jesus did survive the cross, does this really take anything away from him? I don't think so. I don't. I think it actually adds knowing the truth about the man and what he brought to the world. I think is enhanced. Nothing is taken away. And I hope that we'll all look at this next combined presentation in that light. Wendelle Stevens. I don't have words really to tell people about Wendelle Stevens. I think that he is the greatest single asset that we have in this UFO and paranormal community. He is a founding director of this Congress, and in truth, without Wendelle's support and without his foundation stone at the inception of this organization, it wouldn't be here for all of us. And I've said this before, I will say it again to you guys, and it's from my heart. I think Wendelle has forgotten more than I'll ever know. And we're so blessed. Ladies and gentlemen, Wendelle Stevens.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you, folks. It's nice to see so many of you back again. I'm going to show you this book first. This just came out. It's an English translation of Guido Moosbrugger's second book. It's on the table back there. Michael Whalen has them. Michael Whalen is one of the members of the U.S. FIGU, and they're putting this out. So get that out of the way now. I'm not going to use the script this morning. I'm going to tell you about some things that happened to us that assured our credibility, mine at least, of the case, because I started out like everybody else. If the pictures are too good to be true, is this really happening? And you know, I speak on other aspects of the UFO phenomena around the country, and frequently I get a question, almost every time, a question, do you really believe in this Meier case? And I'm here to tell you that I really do believe in it. And I was as much of a skeptic as anybody to begin with, because that's my business. I'm not a skeptical advocate, but I had my problems. Now let me characterize Mr. Meier for you as I understood him. When I first got there, and met Mr. Meier, I sat down in his kitchen. They welcomed us right in, and I sat down in the kitchen across the table from him. And I went there with Ilse von Jacobi. She was a German-English translator. She was a multilingual journalist in Germany. She wrote for Blick magazine and Il Tempo in Italy and several others. And she had gone to visit Mr. Meier from Karl Weiz's organization, UFO Nachrichten. That means UFO News, published out of Wiesbaden, Germany. She was also a key member of that group. And the one before her, the only other UFO investigator before her, was Lou Zinstad, who was a niece of Carl Jung. She was one of the first UFO researchers and investigators in Europe. She had one of the first UFO groups. She published the first UFO journal in any language in Europe, and it was published in German out of Basel. She was Carl Jung's niece, and he used her as a sounding board for his own examinations of the UFO phenomena. And she had a lot of consultation with him. And she told me one time, sitting in her apartment there in Basel, she said, you know, he was working with, since he had a younger sister, who was a voice channel that he communicated with regularly, the discarnate voice, through his younger sister, from which he developed many of his ideas. Now, I never knew that before. And I don't think the world knows much about that. But anyway, when I went to Switzerland the first time, everybody told me that I would need a translator because Meier didn't speak English. So I persuaded Ilse von Jacobi to go down there with me, and we arrived at the house and sat down across from him, and I looked at my translator and I said, I am very pleased to meet you, Mr. Meier. I would like to ask you some very pointed questions. Do you mind? He says, if you speak slowly, and he says, no, I don't mind. And if you speak slowly, I can understand. And I looked at my translator, and her mouth was open and her eyes were big, and she said, but he doesn't speak English. So I said, how long have you been speaking English? He says, oh, I speak a little. And so we just talked in English after that, and when he got stuck, the translator would interject. Now let me characterize the man for you that was sitting across from the table from me. He was a very sincere-looking man. He was simple. He had one arm missing, his left arm, I believe it was. He had very clear, sharp eyes. He was the kind of a guy, when you asked him a question, you looked him in the eyes, he didn't look away. He looked right into your soul. And he answered directly. He didn't hedge. He didn't run around the bush. He answered the questions very directly and very pointedly. He invited me to stay and gave me a bed in the house where they lived. I learned from living with him that he was a kind of a fellow that a lie was a great sin to him. He would take a beating or to anything to avoid a lie. He always told the truth. He answered directly. He never looked away. He was never devious in any respect. He told me that he considered himself an anti-materialist. And I saw that in practice because he never carried any money with him. Other people carried the money, but he didn't like to touch money, for one thing. He didn't like possessions. He didn't own anything but his little moped that he had gotten from somebody else. I think it had been given to him. And he was very direct in answering everything. He wasn't devious in any way. So we became pretty close personal friends, and because of our close association and working together, we learned to communicate pretty well. He learned a lot more English than I ever learned German. But he was a very practical man. He was the kind of guy that was busy all the time. If you weren't with him when he was busy, you didn't get to talk to him. If he was, well, for example, I got up one morning, had coffee, and I was trying to talk to him. He motioned for me to come on. We went out and got on a wagon, a farm wagon. Went down to some farm where some farmer had donated a load of manure for their garden. And he got off, and here's this guy with one arm could pitch a full pitchfork full of manure onto the wagon, and he pitched it off again along with the other men that were using two arms, and I was using two arms. And as a kind of aside from that, when Shirley MacLaine went to visit him, he wasn't particularly impressed by anybody. And she was trying to talk to him, and he'd get up and go to do things that he had to do and then come back and talk for a bit and then do something else, and she was getting pretty exasperated. And she wanted a whole day with him, and the next morning they got up, they're getting ready to go to work. It was very similar to my experience. And she's trying to talk to him, and the men start going out. He says, I've got to go. You may come if you like. So she went with him, and they got on the same wagon and went and hauled another load of manure, and Shirley MacLaine pitched it on and off along with everybody else. And when he saw that, he started talking to her. Then he would sit down and talk to her in the evening after all the work was done, and they had dinner and everything, and she talked to him quite a bit at length. Now, Shirley MacLaine is probably the world's expert on extraterrestrial visits from the Pleiades. She has been to every Pleiadian contactee, and each of the Pleiadian contacts is different from the others. They're not all coming from the same place. But she has been to all, there's about 9, and she's been to them all and spent days with them getting their story and their information. So when she heard that this case involved Pleiadians, she immediately wanted to go look him in the eye. She bought our tickets. We went over with her. And she lived with him also in the house for a week and talked to him while they were working and talked to him in the evenings when everything else was settled. So there was a remote possibility we could have had her here on the stage with me today, but that fell apart at the last minute because of transportation problems. And also Lee Elders was going to be here, him and his wife. They're the people that I brought in to the investigation with me, and I'll tell you why. I was already investigating UFO cases, and I was good friends of Jim and Coral Lorenzen, the founders of AFRO. AFRO, Aerial Phenomena Research Organization, is the oldest civilian UFO research in the organization in the world. It was the first real civilian UFO research organization in the world. Jim and Coral founded it when NICAP came into being, advertising itself as the civilian research organization, but when we learned that the founders were all retired CIA officers and that NICAP was created to take to get information that experiencers would not divulge to government investigators, then we knew that UFO was the only one that was truly doing this, and there were a number of spin-offs after that. There were a whole bunch of private organizations that sprung up, but they were the first and the oldest and the longest. Anyway, I took my information that I was learning back to AFRO. I frequently discussed it with Jim and Coral Lorenzen, but they took a negative stand in the very beginning, and I'll tell you why. And all the other UFO groups followed their cue. When, shortly after Meier's contacts began, Lou Zinstag again, the journalist, multilingual journalist in Basel, it's in her backyard. She went to visit him. She took Timothy Good with her, a young guy that now has become well known as a UFO researcher in his own right in England. But he was a kind of a protege of Lou Zinstag, and she took him to the Swiss farm, and they went to meet Mr. Meier. She had a similar experience to mine. She thought he was very sincere. She thought that what he was describing was really happening to him. She had plenty of evidence of that. She had talked to other witnesses. She looked at some of the contact sites. She looked at the photographs. She even brought some photographs with her when she came to see me. But after visiting him a couple of times, she had some of these remarkable pictures he had taken. And I had been exchanging pictures with Lou Zinstag for some time already, and she called me after she had got home from her first visit. She said, "I've got something really interesting that I want to show you." And she said, "I'm going to be in the United States next month. I'm coming to do some more research on the Adamski case. Tim and I are writing a book about George Adamski, and he was an old friend of mine, and we want to go back to his home and look at some records." So she said, "If you'll pick us up at the bus station when we get in, we'd be happy to come by and show you what I'm carrying." Well, Lee and Brett Elders happened to be sitting in my living room. They came down to visit me that weekend, and they were there when I got the call from the bus station to go down and pick up Lou Zinstag and her friend, which I did, brought them out to the house, and right after we got there, she opened her purse. She said, "I want to show you something," and she pulled out an envelope with 12 pictures in it. And she handed me the envelope, and I opened them up, and I looked in, and there were 12 of the Meier photographs. Beautiful photographs. Too good to be true. What I thought and everybody else thought. And I said, "Do you really think this case is happening?" And she says, "Well," she says, "I'm pretty sure that it's happening." But she says, I don't like it. And I said, "Well, what's wrong with it?" She said, "Well," she said, "they don't have a Jesus Christ." And she was a born-again Christian. She had asked Meier about what they knew of Jesus Christ, and he didn't give her an answer that she liked. And so she was of the opinion that the case was legitimate, but it was coming from the other side. So she divorced herself from investigating the case, and that's about the time that I moved into the case and found out that Ilse von Jacobi from Duist, UFO Nachrichten out of Wiesbaden, was also investigating the case, and I teamed up with Ilse von Jacobi because she spoke German fluently and English too. So I looked at the pictures in my house, and I wanted to have a copy the worst way. She said, I can't give you any copies. Can't allow you to copy them. And after a whole afternoon of arguing, it was 5 o'clock or 5:30 in the afternoon, and she said, well, I'll let you shoot a copy of a couple. Well, shooting meant taking my camera and trying to shoot a copy of the picture that she's holding. And we're doing it in poor light in the afternoon because the sun is down. I have only the light through the window to do it. No proper close-up lenses or anything else. But I did have an image I could look at. And the more I looked at it, the more curious I became. And so I decided I was going to have to go to Switzerland and look Mr. Meier in the eye and myself and see what Lou Zinstag had seen, see what Ilse von Jacobi had seen. And I bought a ticket on Laker and went over there. By the time I'd gone there the third time, my friend Lee Elders and his partner in Intercept, Tom Welch, were in London sweeping a big bank system. And on that third visit, when I intended to stay 2 weeks, living in Meier's house again, I had persuaded him to take me back to all of the photographic sites. That was what I was most interested in, was the photograph. So he took me to each one in turn, and we walked over the site. He parked his moped where he had parked it before. He walked over it when they showed me the positions he took when he took the pictures, where he was standing, where the ship was, and everything else. And at that point, during those visits to the photographic sites, I became pretty much convinced that he could not have faked the pictures, because there was no way he could suspend an image into the scene in front of us, because in most cases he was on the shoulder of a hill that rolled down steeply away from him, and it was 10 miles across the valley up the other side. Nothing to string wires to, no way to loft a model into the picture and photograph it, because the guy that was throwing it would have to be in the picture because of the view to the sides of each of the images. And so I called, or Lee Elders in Zurich called me in my guest house in Switzerland and asked me how I was doing. I said, oh, you've got to come over here. I'll pay for you to take it. Just come on over. I want you to see what I'm seeing. So him and Tom showed up the following day, and Meier took us around to all of them again, and they agreed that these pictures would have been impossible for anybody to fake, even with a big team of experts that couldn't have done it. And that's how they became involved in the investigation with me. Now, there was another thing. Afro was interested in what I was doing, but when Lou Zinstag came into town, she had called me and made arrangements with me. I picked her up at the railroad station, at the bus station, brought her to my house. She said, I'd like to make a courtesy call on Jim and Coral Lorenz, and I correspond with them regularly. I said, fine, let's call them and invite them to dinner. And we'll go down to someplace down your hotel and have a nice dinner. So we did, and they accepted in the afternoon. And then at 6 o'clock, when we were going to meet at the restaurant, and Jim and Coral were going to meet us there too, Jim showed up alone. And he said, Coral's not feeling too well. She's not going to come. So we went in and sat down at the table, and we were starting to order our dinner when the phone rang, and the waiter brought the telephone to Lorenzen and handed it to him. He listened for a few minutes. He says, I'm going to have to go. The dog is sick. And I knew, because I'd known him for some time, that this was Coral's order for him to get home immediately. She was a heavy drinker, and by 5 or 6 o'clock in the afternoon, she was fairly intoxicated, and that was she was always threatening Jim to do something to the dog if he left her sight during those times, because she wanted him there. So he left, and he never did get to hear about the Meier case at all. He left before the conversation even got started. He never saw the pictures or anything. And they left the next day to go on to Vista, California, to Adamski's old home to continue their investigation. And I took the 4 copies that I had shot with the images small in the middle of my picture, showed them to them and told them what they said about it. They said, well, keep us informed. So I did, but the next day when Coral saw the pictures and heard about the case, she took the position that I had stole APRO's case. That they considered me a member of APRO, but I've never been a member of any UFO organization because I never felt like I agreed entirely with what they were doing or what they thought. There was a lot of backbiting going on. I didn't like that. So even though the Lorenzens tried to give me membership cards a number of times, I always returned them, and most of the others that I received. And so now that the case is becoming quite exciting, Coral took the position that I had stolen APRO's case and that I was a traitor and a renegade, and they took my keys to the office away, and they took my keys to the files away, locked the doors, and kept me out, told me not to come back. And then Coral was the chief communicator in APRO, and she did most of the writing. She wrote the bulletin, she wrote the editorial, she was the one that set policy at APRO, and she told others that she talked to that she thought the case was a fraud, that I had managed to get the case, that I probably couldn't handle it, that it really was their case and things like that. Now, my problem when I got the case, I would gladly have taken APRO in with me, except they didn't have any money. They didn't have any way to send anybody over there with me. I would have had to pay for them. And they didn't have any way to send anybody else over there with me. And this was true of MUFON, which was a baby organization back in Wisconsin at the time. Nobody had money in their accounts that could send an investigator to Switzerland. I was going on my own money. So since they couldn't send somebody else and they couldn't get into it, so to speak, they began attacking the case, and everybody else followed suit. Now, MUFON had some correspondence in Germany, and about the 6th or 7th time I was there, a German showed up at the property there, Meier's property in Switzerland, gave him a MUFON identification card, said he was there to investigate the case for MUFON, and the ladies came in and told, I was in the house at the time, they came in and told us there's a MUFON investigator out there. What should we do? I said, well, answer his questions, show him some pictures, he'll go on his way. He doesn't have long. He's probably a businessman, or he's working this weekend. He works for the week. He's going to have to be back for work Monday morning. He's not going to stay long. Just treat him as best you can. So they left that fellow alone on the patio with the 3 albums. By now we'd put the pictures in the plastic albums. And when the ladies got up and went inside to do other things, he'd take his camera out and snap pictures, copy pictures, Meier's pictures, through the pocket of the album, through the plastic in the album. And those are the pictures that MUFON sent to Bill Spaulding at Ground Saucer Watch in Phoenix, who had a reputation at the time for analyzing UFO photographs by computer. And he published the report, or gave APRO a report, which they published, and then MUFON published, or MUFON, maybe the other way around, alleging that the pictures were all of a 12 to 18-inch model suspended from a line, that they were all fakes. And MUFON published the report of the fakes, APRO published the report. All of the other UFO organizations copied from those reports. Now, we were working with the original slide transparencies. Meier took all of his pictures on slide transparencies, positive slide transparencies, ASA 100 speed, all at a setting of 125th of a second f11, because his camera had been dropped and broken, and the focus ring was jammed, the setting rings were jammed. He couldn't change the settings on his camera anyway. All he did was put film in, snap pictures, and take it out and have it developed. So we were looking at the original slide transparencies. In fact, with Mr. Meier, we went to good photo laboratories in downtown Zurich, and there are some excellent photo technicians in Switzerland, some of the best. And I had to make enlargements from the original slide transparency, 16 by 20 inches. That's an enlargement about that size. And we never saw any evidence of suspension lines in any of those. Of course, we didn't give those to GSW, and we didn't give them to APRO, and we didn't give them to MUFON. And so we also did some other things. We found that in Basel, in Lou Zinstag's hometown, there was a new Hell chromograph laser scanner. Hell chromograph 300, it was one of the early ones. Argon laser scanner. And this was one of the first machines that could scan the slide transparencies and make 4 separate color separation negatives. One red, green, and blue, and black and white. Black. And we took one of the slides there and let them color separate it into plates to print posters, 18 by 24 inch posters. And so the negatives are 18 by 24 when they come out of the Hell chromograph scanner. And the posters were printed back at 200 dots per inch, which is normal poster size, but it's still like a newspaper picture. It's a bunch of dots run together. But I'm going to come up to that.